Welcome to another edition of Comet Algebra. This video is for Algebra 1, Chapter 6, Section 1, Graphing Lines. So let's start with a few definitions. First definition is a linear equation. This is an equation that has a straight line as a graph. A linear equation usually has an x and a y in it, but you'll notice there isn't an x squared, there's no x to the third. We're not dividing by x, nothing like that. A linear equation could look like this, y equals 4x plus 3. Remember that f of x and y are completely interchangeable, so we could write it f of x equals 1/2 x. And we'll be looking at a lot of linear equations in this chapter. Next definition you need to know is what standard form is. Standard form, like this one, for instance, is not in standard form. This is solved for y, which we do very often, and this is very useful. So we need to be able to move fluently between the y equals form of the equation and the standard form. Standard form says the x term is first, then the y term, then the equal sign, and then the number, or we call it the constant. And the reason these a, b, and c are capital is because they're special. A, b, and c are not fractions or decimals. Okay, they're whole numbers. So if there is a fraction in there, we need to get rid of it. So let's look at our first example. Example 1 here says, write the linear function f of x equals negative 5/7. I can see I forgot the x there, so let's put that in. X plus 1 plus 2 as a linear equation in standard form. So we're given this equation in the y equals form and asked to move it into standard form. So the first thing I'm going to do is replace this f of x with the letter y, and then I'm going to rewrite it. So now we have a couple things to do. We need to get this x term over to the other side, and we want to leave the 2 over here because the 2 is the constant, is the c. And then after we get this in order, we'll have to get rid of the fractions. So let's start by adding a 5/7 x to both sides. And I'm going to put it in front because I want my x term first. So now I have 5/7 x plus y equals 2. So that helped a lot, getting that x term over. And then we learned, back in chapter 2, I believe it was, we learned how to get rid of fractions when it's in an equation. We can multiply the entire equation by this denominator, meaning we could multiply this term by 7, this term by 7, and this term by 7. Remember, you have to treat them all the same. And if you multiply a line by a factor like this of 7, you haven't changed the line. It's still the same line on the graph. So 5/7 times 7 is just 5x. 7y is just that, 7y equals 14. So now we have taken this line from the y equals form, and we have written it in standard form. Perhaps not in this assignment, but coming up, we will be given a line in standard form and asked to solve for y. So we need to be able to go both ways with this. This list goes through the steps of what we're going to do to graph a linear equation. First, solve the equation for y, because that will make it easier to find our input and output. Make a table of at least 3 ordered pairs. A table is, sometimes I call it a T-chart in class. And you have to pick 3 x's. If we're not given a domain, you can pick any 3 x's you want. And I suggest you pick kind of easy numbers. Don't pick negative 192. Some people pick x to be like 0, 1, and 2, or something like that, or negative 1, 0, 1. You get to pick these and do at least 3 ordered pairs so that we make sure we have the 3 of them lining up for a straight line. Next, you graph them, and if there's no limit on the domain, you do connect the dots to form a straight line. So let's do example 2. Let's graph x plus 3y equals 4. Step 1 was to solve for y. So the first thing I'm going to do is subtract an x from both sides, which gives me 3y equals, I'm kind of used to putting the x term first, so that's what I'm going to do, but you could do that either way. Next, we want to divide everything by 3. And please remember, you divide each term by 3. And then we have y equals, now some of you like to write this as negative 1/3 x. Some of you will want to write it as negative x over 3. That's the same thing. Plus 4/3. So now after we have solved this for y, we need to make an xy table. So I need to pick a few values for x. I'm going to choose 0 and 1. And I'm trying to plan ahead here to not get too many fractions. Let's try 3. And I'm going to do an extra point just to make sure, because with this fractions I don't want to make a mistake. So now let's just do the math here. If we put in a 0 for x, okay, there we got a fraction of 4/3. Okay, that's not always really fun to graph with fractions, but we'll work with it. Putting in a 1 here for x, I have negative 1/3 plus 4/3, and that equals 3/3, which is just 1. So that worked out nice. Now let's put a 3 in for x. 3 times negative 1/3, if you want to look at that, negative 1/3 times 3 plus 4/3. This is negative 1 plus 4/3. This is negative 3/3 plus 4/3 is just 1/3. So that didn't work out as well as I hoped it would. Let's try the 4. Putting in a 4 here, I get negative 4/3. Oh, this is nice. Plus 4/3, I get 0. So now let's graph these points. So 0 4/3 is just above the 1. Okay, 1, 1. That's pretty easy. Out here at 3, we're just above the x at 1/3. And out here at 4, we're right at 0. So they did line up, my points. That helps me know that I didn't make any mistakes. And then we connect these dots to graph the line. The next thing we're going to discuss is the intercepts. What I've done on this graph, I've marked the intercepts with these red sort of dots. The y-intercept is right here where the graph crosses the y-axis. Okay, so the word intercept is where it crosses. And here, right where the graph crosses the x-intercept, the x-axis is called the x-intercept. So I just want you to note something. Right here at the y-intercept, right at that point, x is 0 because we haven't gone sideways at all. We just went up 4/3. And right here, the x-intercept, right at that point, y is 0. And that we can see that very clearly in these 2 points on the table. Now we're going to use this fact to find them algebraically. So putting into words here what we just talked about, the x-intercept is defined to be the point where the graph crosses the x-axis. And algebraically, we know that right at the point where it crosses the x, y is 0. And so we can use this to find the x-intercept by doing these steps. In the equation, put 0 into the equation where the y is, and then use your algebra skills to solve for x. And then the vice versa is true. The y-intercept is the point where the graph crosses the y-axis, and algebraically we can find that because we know that right at that point x is 0. So we find the y-intercept by putting a 0 into the equation where the x is, and we solve for y. All right, this last example, asks us to use the x and y intercept to graph this line. So we're not going to make a t-chart this time. We're going to find the two intercepts and then we're going to connect those dots. So let's go through this algebraically. First of all, to find the x-intercept, remember we're going to let y equal 0 and solve for x. So let's write this equation here. We have 2x. We're going to put in the 0 for the y equals 6. And now we're going to solve this for x. And x is 3. Therefore, the x-intercept is the point. We're just going to write this really clearly. The x-intercept is the point 3, 0. Now let's do the y-intercept. Remember, where it crosses the y, that's where x is 0. So let's put this 0 into the equation for x. 2 times 0 plus y equals 6. Therefore, y equals 6. So now we know that the y-intercept is the ordered pair 0, 6. So now let's graph these 2 points. So we graph the x-intercept out here, 1, 2, 3, 0. So that's right here. Here's the x-intercept. Now the y-intercept is 0, 6. So that's not sideways at all, but up 6, 3, 4, 5, 6. So there's the two intercepts. Now I've graphed them, and this will be a challenge for me to draw a straight line, and then we connect them. And I missed. Anyway, you get the idea. Find the two intercepts and connect them is another way to graph the line. All right, so now you have the information you need to do section 6.1, so have fun with math.